The bullet pierced the silence of the Montana dawn, shattering any hope Olivia Jensen had of escaping unseen. Heart pounding against her ribs, she urged her chestnut mare faster, the abandoned broken spoke ranch disappearing into the golden haze behind her. The pursuer's hoofbeats grew louder, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Olivia knew she couldn't outrun him, not with her limited supplies and exhausted mount. It was 1878, and the unforgiving wilderness of Montana Territory offered little mercy to a woman alone. 3 days earlier, Olivia had fled her family's homestead after the devastating news of her father's murder-a-killing that had been disguised as an accident, but that she knew was orchestrated by land baron Victor Holloway. Her father had refused to sell their modest cattle operation, becoming the final holdout in Holloway's scheme to control the entire valley. The approaching rider was undoubtedly one of Holloway's men, sent to silence her before she could reach the territorial marshal in Helena with evidence of the conspiracy. As her horse struggled up the rocky incline, Olivia made a split-second decision and veered sharply into a dense copse of pines, sliding from the saddle and slapping her mare's flank to send her running as a diversion. Crouched behind a boulder, Olivia clutched the leather pouch containing her father's journal, the documentation that would prove Holloway's crimes. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she watched the silhouette of a lone rider pause at the edge of the trees, scanning the terrain. Quinn Aldridge had been tracking the woman since sunrise. Not for Holloway, as she surely suspected, but because of a promise he'd made to her father with the man's dying breath. Thomas Jensen had been more than just Quinn's former employer. He'd been the closest thing to family Quinn had known since losing his parents to cholera as a boy. When Thomas had been thrown from that cliff, Quinn had reached him just in time to hear his final words: "Protect Olivia. Holloway will come for her next." Now, dismounting from his dappled gray stallion, Quinn studied the ground. The woman was clever. She'd sent her horse running northeast while her own footprints betrayed her hiding place among the rocks. He approached cautiously, knowing she was likely armed and certainly frightened. "Miss Jensen," he called softly, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not here to harm you." The response was immediate, the unmistakable click of a revolver being cocked. "Stay back," Olivia commanded, her voice remarkably steady despite her fear. "I know who sent you." Quinn remained still. "Your father sent me before he died." A tense silence followed. Then, "Prove it." "Thomas Jensen kept a silver pocket watch that played a tune when opened your mother's favorite before she passed. He showed it to me the night before he died, said he planned to give it to you on your 21st birthday next month." From behind the boulder, Olivia's breath caught. No one but family knew about that watch. "Who are you?" she demanded, still not revealing herself. "Quinn Aldridge. I worked your father's north pasture last spring before taking a job with the stage company. I was driving the Helena route when I found him at the bottom of Eagle Cliff." Slowly, Olivia emerged, the revolver still trained on him. She was smaller than he remembered, barely reaching his shoulder, but her blue eyes held a fierce determination that made her formidable despite her size. Her honey blonde hair had come loose from its pins, framing a face smudged with dust and marked with exhaustion. "If my father sent you, then you know what this is about," she said, gesturing with her free hand to the pouch at her waist. Quinn nodded. "The ledger. The proof that Holloway's been bribing officials and threatening landowners. I know. And I know there are at least 3 men besides me tracking you right now, but they're working for him." Olivia's hand trembled slightly, but her aim didn't waver. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm your only chance of reaching Helena alive." Quinn took a cautious step forward, "and because I made a promise to a man I respected." For a long moment, she studied him, taking in his weather-worn features, the honest directness of his gaze, the way he stood confident but non-threatening. At 29, Quinn had the look of a man who'd seen enough of the world to be wary, but not so much that he'd lost his principles. Finally, Olivia lowered the gun. We need to move. They can't be far behind. Quinn nodded, relief washing through him. There's an old trapper's cabin about 3 miles west. We can hole up there until nightfall, then cut north through Bear Creek Pass. It'll add a day to the journey, but Holloway's men won't expect that route. As they retrieved his horse, Quinn couldn't help noticing how Olivia's shoulders drooped with fatigue when she thought he wasn't looking. She had clearly been riding hard for days with minimal rest. "When did you last eat?" he asked as he helped her mount behind him. "Yesterday. Some jerky and hardtack." Quinn frowned. "We'll remedy that at the cabin." The ride to the trapper's shelter was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Quinn was acutely aware of Olivia's arms wrapped around his waist, her body occasionally pressing against his back when the terrain grew rough. It was an intimacy born of necessity, but discomforting nonetheless. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room shack with a leaking roof and dirt floor, but its stone fireplace was intact, and the location was defensible, nestled against a rocky hillside with good visibility of the approaches. "It's not much," Quinn apologized, helping Olivia dismount. "It's better than being out in the open," she replied pragmatically, surveying the humble shelter. "I'll check for anything useful inside while you see to your horse." By the time Quinn had unsaddled and rubbed down his stallion, tethering him in a sheltered spot with access to water from a small spring, Olivia had cleared the worst of the debris from the cabin floor and located an old iron pot. "Found some wild onions growing outside," she said, holding up a handful of green shoots. "If you've got anything to add to them, we might manage a decent meal." Quinn produced a small sack from his saddlebags. Salt pork, coffee beans, and cornmeal, not fancy but filling. As they worked together, preparing a simple stew, Quinn noticed how capable Olivia's hands were not the soft, protected hands of a pampered woman, but those of someone who knew real work. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. Surprised a woman knows how to cook over an open fire. He smiled slightly. "No, madam, just appreciating competence when I see it. There's plenty who'd be falling apart after what you've been through." A shadow crossed her face. "I haven't had time for falling apart, and please don't call me madam, it makes me feel ancient." "What should I call you then?" "Olivia is fine." "Olivia," he repeated, testing the name. It suited her strong but with a certain elegance. As they ate their meager stew, Olivia finally explained everything. How Holloway had systematically bought or intimidated every rancher in Elk Valley over the past year. How her father had discovered that Holloway was damming up streams to deny water to holdout ranchers, forcing them to sell. And most importantly, how Thomas Jensen had documented every threat, every suspicious accident that had befallen those who resisted. "The territorial judge is my father's cousin," she explained. "If I can get this journal to him, he can issue warrants for Holloway and his accomplices." Quinn listened, impressed by her clarity and determination. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Holloway has men in every town between here and Helena. I know, that's why I was avoiding settlements." She looked at him directly. "You really think we can make it?" There was vulnerability in the question that made Quinn's chest tighten. "Yes," he answered firmly. "We'll make it." That night, they took turns standing watch. During his shift, Quinn found himself studying Olivia as she slept, curled on her side with her father's journal clutched protectively against her chest. In sleep, the fierce mask she wore in waking hours softened, revealing the youth and vulnerability she worked so hard to conceal. When it was her turn to watch, Quinn tried to sleep, but found himself instead contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. He'd been drifting for years, taking jobs where he could find them, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. Now, he'd committed himself to this dangerous journey with a woman he barely knew, risking his life for her cause. Because of a promise, he reminded himself. Because Thomas Jensen had shown him kindness when few others had. But as he finally drifted into sleep, another thought surfaced that perhaps there was something about Olivia Jensen herself that made the risk seem worthwhile. They left before first light, taking a game trail that wound through dense pine forest. Quinn set a grueling pace, knowing their head start wouldn't last long once Holloway's men found their trail. Olivia rode behind him without complaint, though he could sense her exhaustion. By midday, they had reached the foot of Bear Creek, past a treacherous route even in good weather. Today, heavy clouds hung over the peaks, promising rain or worse. "We need to cross before the storm hits," Quinn said, studying the darkening sky. "Once it starts, the creek swells fast and the trail turns to mud." Olivia nodded, her face set with determination. "Lead on." The ascent was arduous. Twice, they had to dismount and lead the horse over sections where the trail had washed out. Quinn found himself impressed by Olivia's endurance. Despite her evident fatigue, she pushed forward without hesitation. They were halfway up the pass when Quinn spotted movement on the ridge above them. "Down," he commanded, pulling Olivia behind a cluster of boulders just as a rifle shot cracked through the air, sending stone chips flying where they had stood seconds before. Holloway's men. Olivia whispered, her face pale but composed. Quinn nodded grimly, drawing his revolver. "At least 2 of them. They must have guessed our route." "How? You said they wouldn't expect us to come this way." "Someone talked. Maybe in town, someone who knew your father and me." He peered around the boulder, narrowly avoiding another shot. "We're pinned down. The trail ahead is too exposed." Rain began to fall, fat drops that quickly became a steady downpour. Within minutes, they were soaked to the skin, and small rivulets of water began streaming down the mountainside. "The storm might be our chance," Quinn murmured. "It'll limit visibility, make tracking harder." "But we'll be just as blind," Olivia pointed out. Quinn's eyes scanned the mountainside, calculating. "There's an old mining tunnel about half a mile east. If we can reach it, we can wait out the worst and possibly circle behind them." Olivia hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I trust you." Something in the way she said it made Quinn's heart stutter. 3 simple words, yet they carried the weight of a responsibility he hadn't sought, but now found himself desperate to fulfill. They abandoned the trail, scrambling laterally across the steep slope as the rain intensified. The ground beneath their feet grew treacherous, mud sliding away with each step. Quinn led his horse with one hand and supported Olivia with the other, trying to shield her from the worst of the deluge. The sound of the storm covered their movement, but it also masked any pursuit. Every few minutes, Quinn would pause, listening intently for sounds beyond the drumming rain and rumbling thunder. By the time they reached the abandoned mine entrance, they were both shivering violently, clothes plastered to their bodies. The tunnel mouth was partially collapsed, but there was enough space to lead the horse inside, out of the storm's fury. The interior was black as pitch. Quinn struck a match, revealing a narrow passage that extended about 30 feet before ending in a pile of rubble where the ceiling had caved in years ago. "Not exactly luxurious accommodations," he said, attempting to lighten the mood as he unpacked his saddlebags. Olivia managed a weak smile, her teeth chattering. Preferable to being shot." Quinn quickly gathered the few pieces of rotting timber scattered around the entrance and started a small fire. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into crevices in the rock ceiling. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly, rummaging in his pack. "I have a spare shirt. It'll be too large, but it's dry." He turned his back, offering privacy as she changed. When she gave him permission to turn around, Quinn's breath caught involuntarily. His blue flannel shirt hung to her knees, making her appear even smaller than she was. She'd let down her hair to dry, and the golden waves tumbled past her shoulders. Without the dirt and tension of the trail, he was struck by how young she looked and how beautiful. He quickly averted his eyes, uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. "Thank you," Olivia said softly, settling near the fire. "For everything, most men would have left me to fend for myself." Quinn busied himself laying out their wet clothes to dry. "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed, studying him with an intensity that made him shift uneasily. You're not. My father must have seen that in you. Your father was a good judge of character, Quinn conceded, except when it came to Holloway. Olivia's expression darkened. Holloway can be charming when it serves him. Half the county still thinks he's a respectable businessman. Only those who stand in his way see his true nature. Tell me about your father, Quinn said, hoping to distract her from darker thoughts. I only knew him as an employer, fair but reserved. A genuine smile touched Olivia's lips for the first time since they'd met. He wasn't always so serious. Before my mother died, he used to sing while he worked. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to manage the ranch accounts. He believed a woman should be able to stand on her own. He succeeded there, Quinn observed. He wanted me to have choices, she continued, a faraway look in her eyes. He turned down 2 marriage offers for me last year, both from men with larger ranches than ours. Said he wouldn't sell me off like a prize heifer just to secure a merger. Quinn chuckled despite himself. I can picture him saying exactly that. What about you? Olivia asked. You said you've been drifting. No family? Quinn stoked the fire, considering how much to share. Lost my folks young, grew up working ranches, freight outfits, whatever paid. Spent some time with the cavalry during the war. I was just old enough by the end. After that, never seemed to find a reason to put down roots. And now, what will you do after we reach Helena? It was a question Quinn had been avoiding. Haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted. First priority is getting you there safely. They fell silent, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional shifting of Quinn's horse. Despite the danger that surrounded them, there was a strange intimacy in the firelit darkness, 2 people thrown together by circumstance, sharing this small pocket of warmth amid chaos. Eventually, Olivia's eyelids grew heavy. Quinn insisted she take what rest she could while he kept watch. As she drifted off, curled on his saddle blanket, he found himself making a silent promise that went beyond the one he'd made to her father. He would see her safely to Helena, yes, but he would also ensure that justice was done, that she could reclaim her home and her future. The thought of what might come after that, he pushed firmly aside. The storm passed during the night, leaving a landscape transformed by mud and debris. They set out at first light, climbing higher into the pass where the air grew thin and cold. Quinn's horse struggled on the steep, slippery trail, forcing them to dismount frequently. We need to reach the summit by noon, Quinn explained as they paused to catch their breath. The descent on the other side is easier, and there's a freight road that leads to Cooperville. We can resupply there. Won't that be risky, going into a town? Less risky than starving. Besides, Cooperville is outside Holloway's usual territory. We'll be careful. By midday, they crested the pass. Below them stretched miles of pine forest, broken occasionally by meadows and the silvery thread of Bear Creek as it widened into a proper river. In the far distance, barely visible through the haze, lay the scattered buildings of Cooperville. The descent was faster, but no less treacherous. Twice, Olivia slipped on loose shale, and Quinn barely caught her before she could fall. The second time, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist, they found themselves unexpectedly close, her face inches from his. For one breathless moment, neither moved. It was Olivia who broke the tension, gently disengaging herself with a murmured, "Thank you." Quinn nodded, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar feelings stirring within him. He'd known many women in his 29 years saloon girls, farmers' daughters, even a banker's widow in Arizona Territory, but none had affected him the way Olivia Jensen did, with her quiet courage and unwavering determination. They reached the freight road by late afternoon and followed it toward Cooperville, moving more cautiously as they approached civilization. Quinn suggested they camp in the woods outside town and that he go in alone for supplies. Too dangerous for both of us to be seen, he explained. I'm less likely to be recognized. Olivia reluctantly agreed, though she insisted on keeping her father's journal with her. If something happens to you, I need to be able to continue on, she said pragmatically. Quinn felt a ridiculous pang at her ready acceptance of his potential loss. "I'll be quick," he promised. Cooperville proved to be little more than a dusty main street with a general store, saloon, livery, and a handful of other businesses catering to freighters and miners passing through. Quinn kept his hat pulled low as he purchased supplies: coffee, flour, bacon, ammunition, and at the last minute, a length of calico fabric that caught his eye. He justified the extravagance as practical. Olivia needed something to replace her trail-worn dress. At the livery, he bought a sturdy mare for Olivia, ignoring the stableman's curious glance at the side saddle he requested. Better to attract some attention in Cooperville than to continue with both of them on one exhausted horse. He was leading both animals back toward the edge of town when a commotion erupted from the saloon. A group of riders had arrived, dusty and grim-faced. One was showing something to the bartender, a paper that Quinn, with a sinking feeling, suspected was a wanted poster. Moving casually but quickly, Quinn turned down a side alley, taking a circuitous route back to where Olivia waited. His instincts screamed that Holloway's men had arrived in Cooperville, and they needed to move immediately. When he reached their camp, Olivia read the urgency in his expression before he spoke. "Trouble?" she asked, already gathering their few possessions. "Riders in town. Didn't get a clear look, but they're asking questions, showing something to folks." She nodded grimly. "How far to the next settlement?" 2 days to Millerton if we push hard, but we're not heading there." Quinn's mind raced, calculating options. "There's an old ranch about 15 miles east, abandoned last year after the owner died. We can shelter there tonight, then cut northeast through the backcountry. Longer route to Helena, but less chance of running into Holloway's men." Olivia studied his face, then nodded decisively. "I trust your judgment." There it was again, that simple declaration of trust that made Quinn's chest tighten. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on practical matters as he showed Olivia the mare he'd purchased and helped her mount. They rode hard until dusk, following game trails through dense forest. Quinn set a punishing pace, driven by the certainty that they were being hunted. Olivia kept up without complaint, though he could see fatigue etched in the lines of her body. The abandoned ranch appeared just as darkness fell: a small main house with a sagging porch, a barn, and corrals overgrown with weeds. Quinn approached cautiously, revolver drawn, but the place was deserted save for a family of raccoons that scurried away from the barn at their approach. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," Quinn said as they entered the dusty main room of the house, "but the roof seems sound." Olivia moved to the stone fireplace, running her fingers along the mantel. "Someone lived here recently," she observed. "There's not as much dust as there should be." Quinn frowned, examining the room more carefully. She was right. While clearly abandoned, the house showed signs of occasional use. A trapper, perhaps, or drifters using it as temporary shelter. "We'll take turns keeping watch," he decided, "just to be safe." They settled into a routine similar to previous nights, caring for the horses, preparing a simple meal, checking their supplies. The difference was the relative luxury of an actual roof, walls, and the remains of furniture. Quinn insisted Olivia take the old rope bed in the single bedroom while he made do with a bedroll near the front door, where he could hear any approach. As they ate by lantern light, Olivia pulled out her father's journal, studying it with a furrowed brow. "Something wrong?" Quinn asked. She hesitated, then turned the book toward him. "There's a name here I don't recognize. My father mentions meeting with someone called Lancaster 3 times in the month before he died. He wrote that Lancaster had confirming evidence." Quinn leaned forward, examining the neat handwriting. "Could be a business associate. I knew all his business contacts. This name never came up." Olivia bit her lip. "What if this person has additional proof against Holloway, something that could strengthen our case? Or it could be nothing," Quinn cautioned. "We can't afford detours or delays." "The longer we're on the trail, the greater the risk." Olivia nodded reluctantly. "You're right. Helena has to be our priority." She closed the journal, then glanced up with a small smile. "Thank you for the dress fabric, by the way. It wasn't necessary." Quinn felt an unaccustomed warmth in his face. "Seemed practical. Your current dress has seen better days. It's a thoughtful gesture regardless." Her smile deepened, creating a dimple in her left cheek that Quinn hadn't noticed before. "Though I'm not sure when I'll have time to sew it." "Perhaps in Helena, after we've seen the judge." Quinn found himself returning her smile. "You'll need something respectable to wear when you testify against Holloway." The mention of their mission sobered them both. Olivia's expression grew serious again. "Do you think it will work?" "Will the journal be enough?" "It has to be," Quinn replied with more confidence than he felt. "Your father was meticulous. If anyone documented evidence properly, it would be him." Olivia's shoulders slumped slightly. "I keep thinking about the ranch, about home." "If Holloway hasn't already seized it, he will soon." "We'll get it back," Quinn assured her. "Once he's arrested, the court will restore your property." "And then what?" she asked softly. "I can't run a cattle operation alone." The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was ready to address. Quinn busied himself with cleaning up their meal things. "You'll figure it out," he said finally. "You're stronger than you know." That night, as Quinn took the first watch, he found himself contemplating futures he'd never before considered. For years, he'd been content with his solitary existence, taking pride in his self-reliance. Now, unbidden, came images of what it might be like to stay in one place, to build something lasting, to share a life with someone like Olivia Jensen. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. It was foolish, of course. He barely knew her. She was grieving, vulnerable, focused on justice for her father. And he was just the man who happened to be there when she needed help. Once they reached Helena, once Holloway was dealt with, she would have no further need of him. Yet as he stared into the darkness beyond the cabin's window, Quinn couldn't quite extinguish the small flame of hope that had kindled in his chest. Sometime after midnight, a sound outside snapped him from his thoughts. Quinn froze, listening intently. There, the soft nicker of a horse that wasn't theirs. The creak of saddle leather. They had company. Moving silently, Quinn crossed to the bedroom doorway, where Olivia slept. He placed a hand gently over her mouth, his finger to his lips when her eyes flew open in alarm. He leaned close, his mouth near her ear. "Riders outside," he whispered. "Get dressed. Be ready to run." Her eyes widened, but she nodded understanding. Quinn withdrew, returning to his position by the window, trying to gauge how many visitors they had and where they were positioned. Olivia appeared at his side moments later, fully dressed, the journal and her revolver clutched in her hands. Her face was pale but resolute in the dim light. "How many?" she breathed. "At least 2, maybe more. They're being cautious." As if confirming his assessment, a voice called from the darkness. "We know you're in there, Aldridge. Send out the Jensen woman and her father's papers, and maybe you walk away from this." Quinn recognized the voice Clay Wilson, Holloway's foreman and chief enforcer. A brutal man with a reputation for enjoying his work too much. "No chance of reasoning with them," Quinn murmured. "We need a distraction." Olivia's gaze darted around the room, settling on the stone fireplace. "Smoke," she suggested. "We could create enough to cover our escape through the back." Quinn nodded approval. "Good thinking. There's a small window in the bedroom that should be big enough. Get the horses ready while I set this up." While Olivia slipped out to prepare their mounts, Quinn piled damp kindling in the fireplace, arranging it to create maximum smoke with minimum flame. When ready, he struck a match just as another call came from outside. "Last chance, Aldridge. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Instead of answering, Quinn lit the pile. Almost immediately, thick smoke began billowing into the room. He opened the front door a crack, allowing some to escape, a visible signal to the men outside that something was happening inside. Then he ran for the bedroom, where the small window stood open. He could hear confused shouts from the front yard, followed by the sound of boots on the porch. The window was indeed tight, but Quinn managed to squeeze through, dropping to the ground outside just as the front door crashed open. Gunshots followed almost immediately, Holloway's men firing blindly into the smoke-filled room. Olivia waited with the horses behind the barn, her face tense but determined. Quinn swung into his saddle, and they galloped into the darkness of the surrounding forest just as flames began to lick at the cabin's dry wooden walls. The fire had spread beyond the fireplace, consuming the abandoned house with surprising speed. The sudden inferno worked to their advantage, creating confusion among their pursuers. By the time Holloway's men organized a chase, Quinn and Olivia had a significant head start, riding hard through terrain Quinn knew from his hunting days. They pushed the horses relentlessly, following a stream for several miles to obscure their trail. Only when the eastern sky began to lighten with approaching dawn did Quinn finally signal a halt in a sheltered ravine. Both horses were lathered and blowing hard. Olivia slid from her saddle, legs buckling as she hit the ground. Quinn caught her before she fell, holding her steady as she found her balance. "You're trembling," he observed, concerned. "Just tired," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "I'll be fine." Quinn didn't release her immediately, struck by the realization of how easily they could have died at the ranch. For a moment, they stood close together, her head just reaching his shoulder, his hands still supporting her arms. "We can't stop long," he said reluctantly. "They'll be tracking us at first light." Olivia nodded against his chest. "I know." Neither moved. Quinn could feel her heartbeat, still racing from their flight. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of their shared danger, perhaps, or of something deeper taking root. Finally, Olivia stepped back, her expression composed once more. "How far to Helena now? 4 days, maybe 5 with the detour we're taking." Quinn surveyed the terrain. "We need to reach the high country by nightfall. There's a line shack used by shepherders in summer, should be empty this time of year." They rested the horses for an hour, then continued northwest, climbing steadily into rougher country. The day grew warm, the late spring sun beating down on them as they traversed open meadows between forested ridges. By mid-afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley they'd left. In the far distance, a thin column of smoke still rose from what had been their shelter the previous night. "Do you think they're still following?" Olivia asked, gazing at the distant smoke. "Wilson isn't the type to give up easily," Quinn replied grimly. "But we've covered a lot of ground, and this terrain isn't easy to track through." They pushed on until dusk, when they finally reached the promised line shack, a crude but solid structure built against a rocky outcrop. Inside was a single room with a plank bed, a table, and a small cast iron stove. Quinn found a supply of firewood stacked outside, dry and well-seasoned. While he cared for the horses, Olivia inventoried their remaining supplies. The hasty departure from the ranch had meant leaving some items behind, but they still had enough food for several days if they were careful. That night, as they sat by the small fire Quinn had built in the stove, Olivia suddenly asked, "Why are you really helping me, Quinn?" He looked up, startled by the directness of the question. "I told you. I promised your father, yes, but there must be more to it." Her gaze was steady. "Most men would have delivered me to the nearest town with a marshal and considered their obligation fulfilled." Quinn considered her words, aware that his answer mattered more than it should. "I respect what you're trying to do," he said finally. "Standing up to men like Holloway takes courage. And he hesitated, searching for words. "I admire courage." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all he was ready to admit to her or to himself. Olivia studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if he'd confirmed something she already suspected. "Well, I'm grateful, whatever your reasons." They sat in comfortable silence after that, until Olivia retrieved the calico fabric Quinn had purchased. "I might as well make use of our rest," she said, producing a small sewing kit from her saddlebag. "Though without proper scissors, this will be challenging." Quinn watched, fascinated, as she used his hunting knife to cut the fabric, then set about quickly transforming it into a simple dress. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, the firelight casting their shadows large against the cabin's rough walls. "Where did you learn to sew like that?" he asked. "My mother taught me before she died, said a woman needed practical skills more than ladylike accomplishments." A sad smile touched Olivia's lips. She was right, as usual. "Tell me about her," Quinn said, genuinely curious about the woman who had raised someone as remarkable as Olivia. For the next hour, Olivia spoke of her mother, Margaret Jensen, who had come west as a teacher before falling in love with a young rancher, who had insisted on working alongside her husband building their home, who had taught her daughter to read from Shakespeare and the Bible, but also how to birth calves and mend fences. "She died when I was 15, pneumonia, after a particularly harsh winter." Olivia's hands stilled on her sewing. "My father was never quite the same afterward. He threw himself into building the ranch as if success might somehow compensate for her absence." "And you, how did you cope?" Olivia resumed her stitching, not meeting his eyes. "I became what he needed, a partner in running the ranch. There wasn't time for grief." Quinn recognized the strategy. He'd employed it himself after losing his parents, focusing on survival, on the next immediate need, never allowing himself to fully process the loss. "You're allowed to grieve, you know," he said quietly. "For your mother, for your father." Olivia's hands faltered again. "Not until this is finished. Not until justice is done." Quinn nodded, understanding all too well the need to postpone emotion until a safer time. "When we reach Helena, then." "Yes," she agreed, "when we reach Helena." But both knew that Helena represented more than just the end of their journey. It was where their paths would likely diverge, Olivia to reclaim her ranch and rebuild her life, Quinn too. What? Return to drifting. The prospect suddenly seemed emptier than before. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They set out early, following game trails through dense pine forest. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through the most difficult passages. By midday, they had reached a high plateau with spectacular views of the surrounding wilderness. Mountains stretched in all directions, their peaks still capped with snow despite the late spring season. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, pausing to take in the panorama. "And remote," Quinn added practically. "Few people come this way except hunters and trappers. We should be safe from pursuit up here." They continued across the plateau, making good time on the relatively level ground. Quinn estimated they had covered nearly 15 miles that day, a significant portion of the distance to Helena. That night, they camped in the open, there being no shelter available. Quinn built a small, smokeless fire, and they huddled close to it for warmth as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. "How much farther?" Olivia asked, wrapping a blanket more tightly around her shoulders. 2 more days should see us to the outskirts of Helena if we maintain this pace." Quinn studied her face in the firelight, noting the fatigue in her eyes. "You're holding up well." "I have motivation," she replied with a small smile. "Justice for my father and a warm bath in Helena." Quinn chuckled. "I can promise the first. The second might depend on how much money you have for a hotel. Enough for 1 night of luxury, I think." Olivia's expression grew thoughtful. "What will you do, Quinn, after we reach Helena?" It was the question he'd been avoiding. "Haven't decided," he admitted. "Might head north. I hear the Canadian territories are looking for experienced hands. Or you could come back to Elk Valley," Olivia said softly. "The ranch will need rebuilding after all this." Quinn's heart skipped at the implied invitation. Before he could respond, however, a sound in the distance made them both freeze, the distant echo of a gunshot. "Hunters?" Olivia whispered hopefully. Quinn shook his head, already moving to extinguish their fire. "Not at night, and not up here." They packed quickly, saddling the horses in the dark. Quinn led them away from their camp at a brisk walk, not wanting to risk the horses at a faster pace on the unfamiliar ground in darkness. "Could they have tracked us this far?" Olivia asked, as they picked their way through a stand of pines. Possibly, or they could be searching a grid pattern, hoping to get lucky. Quinn guided his horse around a fallen log. Either way, we need to put more distance between us and that shot. They traveled for several hours in the darkness, moving as quietly as possible. The terrain began to slope downward, indicating they were leaving the plateau. Quinn chose their path carefully, aware that a misstep on the increasingly steep descent could be disastrous. Finally, when both they and their mounts were exhausted, Quinn found a sheltered dell formed by a cluster of massive boulders. They made a cold camp, not daring to risk a fire, and took turns keeping watch as they had on previous nights. During his watch, Quinn found his mind returning to Olivia's casual invitation. Come back to Elk Valley. The ranch will need rebuilding. Was she merely being practical, recognizing the need for experienced help? Or was there something more behind the offer? And why did the prospect stir such hope within him? When dawn came, they moved out immediately, continuing their descent into more heavily forested terrain. The day was overcast, a low ceiling of clouds threatening rain. They maintained a steady pace, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hardtack. By late afternoon, they reached a familiar landmark, Three Sisters Creek, which Quinn knew eventually joined the Missouri River near Helena. They followed it downstream, making good time on the relatively flat ground beside the watercourse. As dusk approached, they came upon an unexpected sight, a small cabin set back from the creek, smoke rising from its chimney. Quinn signaled a halt, studying the dwelling warily. Wasn't expecting anyone to be living out here. Is it safe to approach? Olivia asked. Hard to say. Could be a trapper, could be a squatter. Quinn considered their options. We need shelter, though, especially with rain coming. I'll go first, see who's there. Leaving Olivia with the horses behind a screen of trees, Quinn approached the cabin cautiously. When he was within 50 yards, the door opened and an elderly man emerged, a shotgun held casually but ready. That's far enough, stranger, the man called. State your business. Quinn stopped, keeping his hands visible. Just passing through, looking for shelter. My companion and I are headed to Helena. The old man squinted at him suspiciously. Companion, eh? Where is this companion? Waiting safely out of range of that shotgun, Quinn replied honestly. We've had some trouble with men following us. Can't be too careful. The man considered this, then lowered his weapon slightly. What kind of trouble? The kind where powerful men want to stop justice being done. Something in Quinn's tone must have convinced the old-timer. He nodded slowly. Reckon I know something about that. Name's Harlan Boggs. Been living out here 15 years, ever since the mining company tried to claim my land by forging documents. Know a thing or two about corrupt men. Relief washed through Quinn. Quinn Aldridge. My companion is Olivia Jensen. Boggs's eyebrows rose. Thomas Jensen's girl, from over Elk Valley Way. You know her father. Met him at the territorial fair 2 years back. Decent man. Heard he had an accident recently. It wasn't an accident, Quinn said grimly. That's part of why we're headed to Helena. Boggs nodded, understanding. Best bring your companion in, then. Rain's coming, and I've got stew on the fire. Quinn returned for Olivia, explaining the situation. She was understandably cautious, but agreed that shelter was preferable to another night in the open, especially with the threatening weather. Boggs proved to be a gracious if gruff host. His cabin was small but neat, with a loft space where he insisted Olivia could sleep while the men made do on the floor below. The promised stew was hearty and flavorful, the first hot meal they'd had in days. As they ate, Olivia explained their situation more fully. Boggs listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as if confirming facts he already knew. This Holloway sounds like bad business, he said when she finished. Reminds me of the mining bosses thinking they can just take whatever they want because they've got money and connections. Exactly, Olivia agreed. But we have evidence. My father documented everything. Boggs glanced at Quinn. And you're helping her out of the goodness of your heart, I suppose. There was something knowing in the old man's tone that made Quinn uncomfortable. Her father asked me to protect her. Hum. Boggs didn't sound convinced. And after Helena? What then? The question hung in the air, echoing Olivia's from the previous night. Quinn avoided looking at her as he replied, "That's yet to be decided." Boggs snorted softly but didn't press the issue. Instead, he offered practical assistance. Fresh supplies, information about the safest route into Helena, and warnings about where Holloway might have men posted. "The main roads will be watched," he predicted. "Best to come in from the north, cross the river at Willow Bend. It's shallow this time of year if we haven't had heavy rain." The "we" wasn't lost on Quinn. "You're offering to guide us. Been thinking of heading to town anyway," Boggs said casually. "Running low on coffee and ammunition, might as well travel together." Quinn exchanged glances with Olivia, who gave a subtle nod of agreement. Having a guide who knew the territory and who clearly held no love for powerful men abusing their positions could only help their cause. That night, as Olivia slept in the loft and Boggs snored softly by the fire, Quinn found himself unable to rest. Their journey was nearing its end, but the most dangerous part still lay ahead. Helena would be heavily watched, and getting to the territorial judge without being intercepted would require luck as well as skill. And beyond that loomed the question he couldn't answer. What then? Olivia's casual invitation to return to Elk Valley with her haunted him. The prospect was more appealing than he cared to admit, not just the chance to put down roots after years of drifting, but to do so with her. Yet he hesitated, unsure if she had meant it as more than a practical arrangement, afraid to hope for something more personal. Morning brought steady rain, forcing them to delay their departure. Boggs used the time to make further preparations, packing supplies and cleaning his ancient but well-maintained rifle. Weather should clear by midday, he predicted, glancing out the window at the gray downpour. Might be for the best. Rain will soften our tracks, make us harder to follow. By early afternoon, the rain had indeed slackened to a drizzle, and they set out. Boggs rode a mule that looked as weathered and tough as its owner, setting a surprisingly brisk pace for a man of his years. They followed the creek downstream, eventually reaching the point where it joined a larger tributary of the Missouri. The terrain became more open, with occasional clearings and abandoned homesteads indicating they were approaching more settled areas. "Need to be more careful now," Boggs warned as they passed an old sawmill. "More people means more eyes that might report to Holloway." They adjusted their route, staying in the tree line rather than following the more established trails. Progress slowed, but the caution seemed warranted when they spotted a group of riders on the main road in the distance. "Holloway's men," Olivia whispered as they watched from concealment. "Can't be sure from here," Quinn replied, "but best to assume so." They waited until the riders had passed, then continued their circuitous route toward Helena. By nightfall, they had reached Willow Bend, where the river widened and slowed, creating the ford Boggs had mentioned. "We'll cross at first light," he decided. Too risky in the dark, even though the water's low. They made camp in a dense thicket, again foregoing a fire despite the damp chill. As they shared a cold meal, Boggs surprised them with an observation. "You two remind me of my Martha and me when we first came west. Same look about you." Quinn nearly choked on his jerky. "We're not, don't bother denying it, son," Boggs interrupted with a knowing chuckle. "I'm old, not blind. The way you look at each other when you think the other isn't watching saw the same thing in my mirror for 40 years with Martha." Olivia's cheeks had flushed pink. "Mr. Boggs, I think you're misinterpreting, am I?" The old man's eyes twinkled. "Well, maybe I am, but if so, you're both bigger fools than you look." With that pronouncement, he rolled himself in his blanket and promptly began to snore, leaving Quinn and Olivia in an awkward silence. "He's just a romantic old man," Olivia said finally, not meeting Quinn's eyes. "Seeing things that aren't there." "Right," Quinn agreed too quickly. "Just an old man's fancy." But later, as he took the first watch and Olivia slept, Quinn found himself wondering if perhaps Boggs had seen something they themselves had been afraid to acknowledge. They crossed the river at dawn, the water running cold but only knee-deep on the horses. Beyond lay more forested hills, with the smoke from Helena's chimneys visible in the distance. "We're close now," Boggs said as they paused on the far bank. "Judge Harmon's house is on the north side of town. We can approach through the old mining camp without using the main roads." "You know the judge?" Olivia asked in surprise. "Know of him, reputation as an honest man, which is rare enough in these parts." Boggs adjusted his hat against the morning sun. "If your evidence is solid, he'll act on it, no matter who Holloway has in his pocket." They continued toward Helena, tension growing as the distance diminished. Quinn found himself constantly scanning their surroundings, aware that they were entering the most dangerous part of their journey. By mid-morning, they had reached the outskirts of town, abandoned mining shacks and equipment from Helena's earlier boom days. They dismounted, leading their horses to attract less attention. "Judge's house is about a mile from here," Boggs murmured. "White place with green shutters, just past the Presbyterian church." They moved cautiously through the abandoned camp, using the dilapidated structures as cover. Quinn's nerves were on edge, his hand never far from his revolver. They were halfway to their destination when Olivia suddenly grabbed his arm, pulling him to a stop. "Quinn," she whispered urgently, "I've just remembered something. The name in my father's journal, Lancaster. He mentioned meeting him at Whitaker's Mercantile in Helena." "This isn't the time to be thinking about that," Quinn responded, scanning the path ahead. "But what if Lancaster is in danger too? What if Holloway knows about him?" Olivia's expression was troubled. "If he has evidence that could help our case, or it could be a trap," Quinn countered. "Holloway might know about the journal entry and be watching for you at Whitaker's." Boggs had stopped to listen to their exchange. "The girl has a point," he said thoughtfully. "If there's more evidence against Holloway, it strengthens your case. And Whitaker's isn't far from the judge's house, just a short detour." Quinn hesitated, torn between the desire to complete their mission as directly as possible and the possibility that this Lancaster might indeed have crucial information. "We'll check Whitaker's first," he decided finally. "But quickly and carefully. At the first sign of trouble, we head straight for the judge." They altered their course slightly, working their way toward the mercantile that stood on a corner near the center of town. As they drew closer to Helena proper, the streets became busier, forcing them to blend in with the regular foot traffic. Whitaker's proved to be a large establishment with multiple departments. Quinn suggested that Boggs remain outside with the horses while he and Olivia went in to inquire about Lancaster. "Be quick about it," the old man advised. "Don't like the look of those fellows across the street." Quinn followed his gaze and spotted two men lounging in front of the saloon opposite, their attention just a bit too casual to be innocent. Inside the mercantile, Quinn kept Olivia close as they approached a clerk. "We're looking for someone named Lancaster," Olivia said quietly. "I believe he sometimes does business here." The clerk, a young man with spectacles, looked surprised. "Mr. Lancaster, he owns this establishment, madam. His office is upstairs, but he's not in today." Quinn felt a surge of interest. This was no random contact then, but a businessman of some standing. "Do you know where we might find him?" Olivia pressed. "It's rather urgent." The clerk hesitated. "I'm not supposed to give out Mr. Lancaster's personal information, but if it's truly urgent." "It concerns Victor Holloway," Quinn said, watching the clerk's reaction closely. "And certain business practices of his." The young man's face tightened at Holloway's name. "I see. In that case, Mr. Lancaster is at his home today, White House on Pine Street, 3 blocks east." They thanked him and left quickly, rejoining Boggs outside. As they discussed this new information, Quinn noticed with alarm that the men across the street had disappeared. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Now." They hurried toward Pine Street, leading their horses through back alleys when possible to avoid the main thoroughfares. The White House was easy to spot, a handsome two-story residence with a well-tended garden. Quinn approached the front door cautiously, Olivia beside him while Boggs kept watch from the street. A housekeeper answered his knock, her expression suspicious until Olivia mentioned Thomas Jensen's name. "Please wait in the parlor," the woman said, her manner warming slightly. "I'll inform Mr. Lancaster you're here." The parlor was elegantly furnished, evidence of Lancaster's success as a merchant. Quinn remained standing, too tense to sit, while Olivia paced near the window. "What if he can't help us?" she worried aloud. "What if we've wasted valuable time?" Before Quinn could respond, the door opened to admit a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, with silver temples and an air of authority. "Miss Jensen," he greeted Olivia, extending his hand. "I've been hoping you would contact me. I was deeply sorry to hear about your father." "You knew him well?" Olivia asked, accepting his handshake. "Well enough to admire his courage in standing against Holloway." Lancaster gestured for them to sit. "And well enough to be concerned when I heard of his accident." "I presume you're here because you don't believe it was an accident either." Olivia nodded, then introduced Quinn and explained their journey from Elk Valley. Lancaster listened intently, his expression growing graver as she described the attacks they'd endured. "Holloway is becoming desperate," he observed when she finished, "which means your father's evidence must be significant." "We believe so," Olivia confirmed. "But my father's journal mentioned you specifically, that you had confirming evidence. We hoped." Lancaster stood and crossed to a painting on the wall. Swinging it aside revealed a small wall safe, which he quickly opened. "Thomas approached me 3 months ago," he explained as he retrieved a document folder. "He knew I'd had my own run-ins with Holloway. As the largest merchant in Helena, I've resisted Holloway's attempts to control shipping rates and supply contracts. In retaliation, he's tried various methods to damage my business." He returned to them, opening the folder to reveal a collection of papers. "What I have here are banking records showing irregular deposits to certain officials who subsequently made decisions favorable to Holloway's interests. Also, affidavits from 2 men who were hired by Holloway to sabotage competing ranches." Quinn whistled softly. "That's more than enough for an indictment." "Precisely." Lancaster handed the folder to Olivia. "Combined with your father's documentation, it presents an irrefutable case of corruption, extortion, and in your father's case, murder." Olivia clutched the precious documents, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. This means—" A sharp rap at the front door interrupted her. Through the parlor window, Quinn saw Boggs gesturing urgently from the garden. Lancaster moved to the window, then stepped back quickly. "Holloway's men, at least 4 of them," Quinn drew his revolver. "Is there a back way out? Through the kitchen?" Lancaster moved to a sideboard and extracted a shotgun. "I'll delay them. You get those documents to Judge Harmon." "You could be killed," Olivia protested. Lancaster's smile was grim. "I've been preparing for this confrontation for years, Miss Jensen. My staff knows what to do. Now go." Quinn took Olivia's arm, guiding her swiftly through the house to the kitchen and out the rear door. They found Boggs waiting with the horses in the back alley, having circled around when he spotted the approaching danger. "Holloway's men have the street covered," he reported, "but there's an alley that runs behind the properties. We can reach the judge's house that way." They mounted quickly, the sound of shouting and then gunfire erupting from Lancaster's house as they galloped down the narrow alleyway. Quinn kept Olivia between himself and Boggs, shielding her as best he could while they navigated the unfamiliar route. The judge's house appeared ahead, the white building with green shutters exactly as Boggs had described. But as they approached, Quinn spotted armed men taking positions around it. "They've guessed our destination," he said grimly. "We need another approach." Boggs pointed to a church across the street. "The Presbyterian Church. Reverend Miller is a friend to justice. He'll hide you while I create a distraction." Before Quinn could protest, the old man wheeled his mule around and galloped directly toward Holloway's men, firing his rifle and whooping like a man possessed. The sudden attack drew their attention and fire, allowing Quinn and Olivia to slip unseen to the church's side entrance. The Reverend Miller proved to be as helpful as Boggs had predicted, quickly ushering them into the church's basement when they explained their situation. From this sanctuary, Quinn watched through a window as chaos unfolded outside. Boggs had led Holloway's men on a wild chase, drawing them away from both the church and the judge's house. "If we wait until dark, we might be able to reach the judge," Quinn suggested. Olivia shook her head. "We can't wait. Lancaster and Boggs have risked their lives to get us this far. We need to act now." She was right, Quinn knew. Delay only increased the danger to everyone involved. "There's a tunnel," Reverend Miller said suddenly. "Built during the early mining days, it connects the church basement to several buildings, including one near the judge's home. It's not used anymore, but it should be passable." The tunnel proved to be narrow and dusty, requiring them to proceed by the light of a single lantern Miller provided. The air was stale, the passage claustrophobic, but it led them steadily toward their goal. They emerged in the cellar of an abandoned shop just 50 yards from the judge's house. Quinn peered cautiously from the shop's front window, assessing the situation. Holloway's men had returned, but in fewer numbers evidence that Boggs's distraction had been partially successful. "We'll have to make a run for it," Quinn decided. "Stay close to me." With the documents secure inside her dress, Olivia nodded her readiness. Quinn took her hand, and they slipped from the shop, keeping to the shadows as they approached the judge's house from the rear. They were halfway across the garden when a shout went up. Gunfire erupted, bullets splintering wood around them as they ran. Quinn fired back, providing cover as Olivia reached the back door and pounded desperately. The door opened, revealing a startled servant. Olivia pushed past him, shouting for Judge Harmon. Quinn followed, slamming the door shut behind them just as more bullets thudded into it. Judge Harmon appeared at the top of the stairs, a tall, imposing figure with a shock of white hair and penetrating eyes. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he demanded. "Judge Harmon," Olivia gasped, clutching the precious documents. "I'm Olivia Jensen, Thomas Jensen's daughter. I have evidence of Victor Holloway's crimes, including my father's murder." The judge's stern expression softened slightly. "Thomas Jensen was my cousin. I've been concerned since hearing of his death." More gunfire outside interrupted their conversation. The judge's expression hardened. "Holloway's men are attacking my home?" he asked incredulously. "Yes, sir," Quinn confirmed. "They've been pursuing us for days to prevent these documents from reaching you." Judge Harmon moved with surprising speed for his age, issuing rapid orders to his staff. Within minutes, armed deputies from the marshal's office had been summoned, and the shooting outside ceased as Holloway's men retreated in the face of official law enforcement. In the judge's study, Olivia and Quinn presented their evidence: her father's journal, Lancaster's banking records, and the affidavits from Holloway's former employees. Judge Harmon reviewed them methodically, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is the most comprehensive case of corruption I've seen in my career," he said finally. "More than enough to issue warrants for Holloway and several officials. I'll have them arrested immediately." Relief washed over Olivia's face. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet," the judge cautioned. "Holloway still has resources and friends. Until he's in custody, you're both in danger. You'll stay here tonight under the protection of the marshal's deputies." That night, in the safety of Judge Harmon's home, Quinn and Olivia finally had a moment alone. They stood in the small garden behind the house, the stars bright overhead, the sounds of Helena muted in the distance. "We did it," Olivia said softly. "My father would be proud." "He would," Quinn agreed, "though we had help along the way. Lancaster, Boggs, Reverend Miller." Olivia counted their allies on her fingers. I hope they're all safe. News had already reached them that Lancaster had successfully defended his home, and that Boggs had evaded capture and returned to the church, where he was recovering from a minor wound. The old trapper's diversionary tactics had worked better than anyone could have expected, allowing the marshal to arrest 3 of Holloway's men. "What happens now?" Quinn asked, voicing the question that had been between them for days. Olivia turned to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "I go back to Elk Valley, rebuild the ranch." Quinn nodded, feeling a heaviness in his chest. "It won't be easy starting over alone." "I won't be alone," she said softly. "Not if you come with me." The words hung in the night air between them, laden with meaning beyond their surface simplicity. Quinn found himself unable to speak, overcome by the realization of what she was offering, not just employment, but partnership, perhaps more. "Is that what you want?" he finally managed. Olivia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of green in her blue eyes. "It's what I want. The question is, what do you want, Quinn?" For a man who had spent years avoiding entanglements, the answer came with surprising clarity. "I want to stop drifting. I want purpose." He reached out, tentatively taking her hand. "I want you." The words, once spoken, seemed to release something in both of them. Olivia moved into his embrace, and when their lips met, it felt to Quinn like coming home to a place he'd never known existed. Later, as they sat together on a garden bench making plans for their return to Elk Valley, Quinn recalled something. "The morning I found your father," he said quietly. His last words weren't just about protecting you. He said, "Tell Olivia I will find her again in the next life." I think he knew, somehow, that I would not just deliver a message, but see it through to the end. Tears filled Olivia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. He always could see further than most. The following morning brought news that Holloway had been arrested while attempting to flee the territory. Judge Harmon assured them that with the evidence they'd provided, conviction was all but certain. "The stolen properties will be returned to their rightful owners," he told Olivia, "including your father's ranch." 2 days later, with the immediate danger past, they prepared to return to Elk Valley. Lancaster provided fresh supplies and better horses for the journey. Boggs, his arm in a sling but his spirit undimmed, announced his intention to accompany them. "Got nothing keeping me in my cabin," the old man declared. "Might as well see if I can make myself useful at a proper ranch." As they left Helena behind, Quinn rode beside Olivia, their future stretching before them like the open country. The journey that had brought them together had been fraught with danger, but what lay ahead promised something they both had thought lost: a home, a purpose, and most unexpectedly, love. A week later, they crested the final hill overlooking Elk Valley. Below them lay the Jensen ranch, or what remained of it. The main house stood intact, but the barn had been partially burned, the corrals broken, the cattle gone. "Holloway's revenge," Olivia said grimly. "He must have ordered this after we escaped." Quinn surveyed the damage, calculating what it would take to rebuild. "It's still standing. We can restore it." Olivia glanced at him, her expression softening. "We." "Yes, we." Quinn reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "If you'll have me." "Not just as a ranch hand, but as my husband," Olivia finished, a smile breaking through her concern over the ranch. Quinn nodded, suddenly uncertain. "I know it's fast. We've only known each other a short time, but sometimes life shows you what matters in the clearest possible way." Olivia's answer was to lean across the gap between them for a kiss that left no doubt about her feelings. They rode down to the ranch, Boggs following with a knowing smile. The buildings were damaged but repairable. The land remained fertile. And within days, word spread through the valley that Holloway had been arrested, and his empire was crumbling, prompting neighbors to return with offers of help and cattle to rebuild the Jensen herd. 3 months later, on a clear autumn day, Quinn and Olivia were married in the small church in Elk Valley. Lancaster made the journey from Helena to attend, as did Judge Harmon. Boggs gave the bride away, resplendent in a new suit that failed to completely disguise his weathered appearance. As the couple exchanged vows, Quinn reflected on the unlikely series of events that had brought them to this moment, a tragedy transformed into something beautiful through courage, determination, and the unexpected discovery of love. After the ceremony, as guests celebrated on the now restored ranch, Quinn found a moment alone with his bride beside the corral where they had first met the previous spring, when he'd been just another drifter looking for work. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her close. "Completely," Olivia assured him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "Though I do wonder what my father would think of all this." Quinn smiled, remembering the man who had, in his final moments, set this entire journey in motion. "I think he'd approve. He wanted you to be safe, to have justice, and to be happy." "I am," she whispered against his chest, "happier than I ever thought possible." As darkness fell across the ranch, they now shared. Quinn held Olivia close, marveling at how a promise made to a dying man had led him not just to fulfill an obligation, but to find his heart's home. The future stretched before them, the challenges of ranching in the Montana Territory, the possibility of children, the certainty that life would bring both joys and sorrows. But whatever came, they would face it together, their love forged in the crucible of danger and sealed with promises neither took lightly. And in the years that followed, as the Jensen Aldridge ranch prospered, and their family grew first with the birth of their son Thomas, and later their daughter Margaret, Quinn often reflected on that desperate dawn when he had found Thomas Jensen dying and made a promise that changed everything. Sometimes, the greatest journeys begin with a single pledge. And sometimes, in fulfilling that pledge, a drifter finds not just purpose, but home. 5 years after their marriage, on the anniversary of Thomas Jensen's death, Quinn and Olivia stood together at the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking their thriving ranch. Their children played nearby, supervised by Boggs, who despite his advanced years had become an indispensable part of their household and a beloved grandpa to the little ones. "I think he would be proud," Olivia said softly, placing wildflowers on her father's grave, "of all we've accomplished." Quinn nodded, his arm around her waist. The ranch had more than recovered from Holloway's depredations. Their herd was now the largest in the valley, and the previous year they had built a new wing onto the house to accommodate their growing family. "He set it all in motion," Quinn acknowledged. "In those final moments, when he sent me to find you." As they walked back toward the house, their 4-year-old son ran to meet them, his little sister toddling behind with Boggs's careful assistance. Quinn lifted Thomas into his arms while Olivia gathered up little Margaret. And together they returned to the home they had built, not just the physical structures, but the family and community they had created. That night, after the children were asleep, Quinn and Olivia sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge over their land. "Any regrets?" Quinn asked, a question he still posed occasionally, amazed at his good fortune. Olivia's answer was always the same. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Not a single one." And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, Quinn reflected that sometimes the most important journeys aren't measured in miles, but in the distance between two hearts finding each other against all odds. For a drifter who had spent years avoiding attachments, he had found something he never knew. He sought a woman whose courage matched his own, whose determination had awakened his, and whose love had given him the one thing he had always lacked: a place to belong.